Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 247 of the Rush Roundtable. Today, we're talking about Out of the Cradle, which is the last track on Vapor Trails, sadly. So, we will be concluding the album with our discussion. I have a great panel with me today. Myself, of course, Paul. I have Vivian and Alex. And before we go into all the details of the song, just want to let you guys know if you like the content you see here, please feel to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you'd like to, you can go to Ko-fi and throw us a tip or two. And we would appreciate that. Also, check out all the sponsors below, all the different links below. Please go there and check out everything that's there and support them. We really appreciate it. And I guess without further ado, we can jump into the beginning of the tune. So it's got a very, very mellow introduction, a great sequence, as Ryder pointed out on the previous episode, of how we kind of transition into this tune. Nice light bass guitar kind of coming in the beginning. And we kind of sneak into the song. It's a very subtle start to the tune. So, do we want to speak about the music before we talk about the lyric?
Well, I think even before talking about the music, all these songs had a tarot card that corresponded with them. Should we take a look at the tarot?
We do. Thank you. Yep. Let's
Yeah.
check.
All right. Tarot card for this one is the Fool. And per my new favorite website, Rush Fan Club Brazil, the tarot card that represents Out of the Cradle is the Fool. A light and free young man walks towards a precipice. The image brings feelings of restlessness and activity, or changes to what is stagnant. It symbolizes detachment from matter, a story to be lived, continuing to live life knowing that something surprising may happen, accepting this fact without worry. It can be interpreted as the curiosity to try new things, or even a bit of confusion, as well as a search that has been stifled for a long time, or a piece of advice to follow spontaneity, being open and receptive to accepting the role of apprentice in life. So, yeah, that kind of helps this song perspective-wise. My main takeaway is going to end up being, just to throw the end at the beginning, this is an amalgam of the entire album. This is the entire process he went through, and this is the end, which turns out is the beginning. So,
Yeah.
Good card.
Oh, like the beginning of the song, where we talk about the intro part. So, yeah, they're mostly leaning into kind of more of a two-chord vamp, really. B and A power chords, which at that point are we thinking is a B minor because the A is a flat seven, but they mostly are going to start treating it as more of a B mixolydian, which very common for rock. I mean, Limelight kind of was a B mixolydian, Big Money, so it's obviously a good key for Geddy's voice.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for mentioning the tarot card, and thank you, Paul, for reading it. And I guess without further ado, we'll get right into the verse. So it's not a place, it's a yearning. It's not a race, it's a journey. It's not an act, it's attraction. It's not a style, it's an action. It's a dream for the waking. It's a flower touched by flame. It's a gift for the giving. It's a power with 100 names. That's an action-packed verse right there. What shall we say about it?
Some of my favorite words ever. It's so bright. It's hopeful. I don't know where the Fool comes into this. I think when I heard you guys talk about the Fool in the passage from Rush Fans Brazil, it just sounded to me like it was an extension of Subdivisions in a way, lyrically. You're talking about the Fool, and he's trying to get out and do more and explore, and he was tied down. This is kind of a off key to Subdivisions, and that's how, I don't know from where it came, but that's what I thought of first thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, because in the story, I mean, consider Ghost Rider, the book, for a moment, and especially we just came off Freeze. So after talking about being stagnant and stuck in one place, and through this journey that Neil's lyrics have taken us through this entire album, now it's time to get through it, not over it or around it like I've said on other roundtables, but now it's time to continue and proceed. The perspective being, we can't move on until we accept these things we've been through. So actually, I think that's a great observation.
I think the lyrics are they're bright. It's not. it's a feeling. It has to come from inside you. And I think that's the message that they're trying to get across. This is how they lived. It has nothing to do with lyrics, music. It's the bond, it's the chemistry, it's the feeling that it gave them when they were on stage, when they were writing. It's the breath of love is electricity. It's a power with 100 names, and it does have 100 names, and Rush makes it 100 names. There are a million ways to describe Rush, and this is just the feeling, the energy that you get.
And to tie into that, and I don't want to jump ahead, but this is, I believe, the first song that uses we as a pronoun in the entire album. So we've come off this very solitary journey, and now it's all of us, which is also ties into Whitman, which I'll get to later. So.
Yeah, that power of 100 names, or power with 100 names, could also be applied to the interpretation of lyric too. We have these different ways to approach the lyrical content and what it means to us personally. So that's that universality thing that we're kind of creeping into, that we can describe this song and what the song means to us in 100 different ways, depending on the day, because it always changes, it seems, where a certain song is a certain favorite one day, and then that could change the very next day, and just goes on and on. So we're in good company with the sentiments of this lyric. So
I always wound up thinking of Neil in regards to this. I mean, obviously the we of the band is inherent, but I always kept. I mean, with this, every song on the album I had to tie to his journey. Like Paul was saying too, the Ghost Rider journey. The idea of, in not to jump ahead into the Whitman thing too, but just thinking of the title of the song, and the idea that it's like, and like Paul also already said, what is a completion is a new beginning, which we can just keep saying because it's important, and Neil would repeat it, and this is clearly the end of the album. So anyway, I don't want to tread onto the chorus or anything. I'll be quiet.
Don't forget when he wrote this, at the time it came out. He had gone through what he had gone through, and this was the emergence. And these are the feelings that came from Neil when he came back and he got together with everybody. And it's the feeling that came from him and the love that he got. And this is where he belonged.
And that will, agreed. And that will, we should probably get to, after the chorus, I'll get into the Whitman, because it keeps going back to this and not referencing it, starting to feel silly on my part.
Yes, excellent sightings here. Okay, so here's the chorus. Surge of energy, spark of inspiration. The breath of love is electricity. Maybe time is a bird in flight, endlessly mocking. Here we come out of the cradle, endlessly rocking, endlessly rocking. So.
Okay, so the Walt Whitman poem that Neil cited as his inspiration for the lyrics for this is Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. So there's that for starters, it's all in the title. It's first published on December 24th, 1859, part of a famous collection called Leaves of Grass. It, like the song, by the way, this is one of the first songs written, but I'm going to paraphrase rather than direct quote it. They said they did a lot of surgery on it, and then it was one of the last ones they completed, which you could tell just from the sequencing and the uplifting note that it ends on, that makes sense. The poem itself, Whitman narrates a boy who walks alone at night on a beach, witnesses two mockingbirds, preparing their nest, and begins to observe them daily. However, one morning the female does not return to the place, and the male begins to cry tirelessly. The lament creates an awakening in the boy, something that amazes him as he recognizes the impact of the natural environment on the human soul and his own understanding. Moved to tears, he begs nature to give him a word superior to all, and like an old woman rocking her cradle, the sea whispers the word death in his ear, which merges with the song of the bird. So that's where the perspective comes in, is once he understands death and accepts it, then he can go on with his life. Both the way Whitman described it was boy, man, poet, death, boy, man, poet, and that was his cycle. And Whitman, which Alex was kind enough to point out in our notes, was since Whitman used music so much and as a parallel in analogies to nature, that's right up Neil's alley. So this is all in the same
It's exactly what he went through. That
Yeah.
same cycle.
Precisely.
To get to this point. Exactly.
Yep.
And to Viv's comment on subdivisions, it's like this started, the Whitman poem began causing me to think of an analog kid. So it's like Neil's just wrapping himself right back.
Yes.
Just the circle keeps kind of looping there.
And even the time frame he got Body Electric, jumping ahead to Grace, was inspired by Whitman. So it's here we go again. So yeah. So it turns out he had these tools to get through this all along.
And the tools make us, as the listener, think. Rush is, and we say this all the time, it's not just music, it's education. Where do you get Walt Whitman? In 97% of songs. It makes you go back, it makes you read, it makes you think, it opens your mind, and you get different views on different things that they wrote.
This album alone, it's been Barash and T.S. Eliot and back to Carl Jung, who we addressed heavily on Counterparts. It's people ask, what are you doing all week when you're prepping for the Roundtable? I'm reading Jung and Barash and Whitman. So yeah, agreed completely.
Yeah.
And musically, I just want to throw in, I love the really up. Talk about a strong positive. I don't know what the beats per minute is, Alex, but
156.
Yeah,
nice sort of moderate fast.
And up tempo, like musically, think of like we've gone through Freeze, Peaceable Kingdom. We've gone some heavy stuff.
Can you imagine if this was done live? It would have been forget about it. It would have been a free will live.
Closer. This would have been a closer. You send the crowd out on a song like this.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Inspired. Yeah.
I just also had a quick one too. If I wanted to be the master of the obvious, or the Mr. Surface level here, I can't help but think of Breath of Life as electricity. Breath of Love as electricity. That, everything, because it's an easy one for us to tie this into the band coming back together, getting together to endlessly rock. And although there's always an end, which we know, the albums are there, the albums will always be there. But Neil also had Carrie in his life at that point too. So there is a new love. So the band's back together. He's got a new love to move him into the next stage of his life. And, so that they can endlessly rock through the rest of our lives and beyond.
And I won't even, there's probably 2 or 3 paragraphs worth, but the whole idea of endlessly rocking is the perpetual motion, not synonym, analogy, whatever, Whitman also brought up. So but as far as Carrie's, I'm glad you brought that up, because they, when you do put the two together, if you read the poem, and I highly recommend you read the poem if you like this song, you'll get so much out of it. It kind of spells it out, where this new spark is what sets the now poet man on his way, and he goes back to his childhood. And don't forget, with Ghost Rider, we're talking little baby soul. So this is now him maturing. Cradle continues to rock, but now he's coming out of it.
And he's understanding exactly what he went through and what's come out of it. And he's sharing with us his experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Whitman said, you must accept and understand death in order to find that new life. And
that's what he did right before all
Precisely.
This. Yes.
Yes, he was seeking work at that point. He said to the guys, with gainful employment.
Gainful employment, right?
Yeah.
His accountant saying, "You can't keep this up. Oh, you got to get a job. What can I do? We can drum. We can be the best drummer. Okay, fine.
All right, fine, I'll do it." He's out of his cradle, and there you have it. So, great points made all around. Let's get into the next verse, shall we? It's a hand that rocks the cradle. It's a motion that swings the sky. It's a method on the edge of madness. It's a balance on the edge of a knife. It's a smile on the edge of sadness. It's a dance on the edge of life. Yeah, so he's emerged from the cradle. So, and actually, the imagery I was going to say before, since we now are into this part, that idea that when you take a baby out of the cradle keeps rocking, and it seems to continue unwatched, of course, but eventually it does stop. But I love that idea of being out of the constraint. And the cradle is a constraint, but it's also a source of comfort that soothes the baby when you rock the cradle. So I just love this whole section here is very visual to me. It kind of brings back moving pictures vibes to me a little bit. But
Well,
what
and
shall we
also,
say about it?
well, also the idea of the motion that swings the sky, because if you are a baby lying in a cradle, it's basically everything else that's moving from your vision because your awareness as a 6-month old, you're there. Everything else is moving because you're just lying there. So you don't realize maybe that you're swinging back and forth because how many 6-month olds are aware of inertia and whatnot? I mean, maybe
But
if their name's Sheldon, but whatever.
it's also everything that's happening is happening while it's moving. No matter what you're doing, the balance, the smile, the dancing on the edge of life, everything is moving around you. It continues to go. You got to go with it. You got to go with the flow. And no matter what, the motion's not going to stop.
And that brings us, think of the songs we've talked about, think of the roundtables. We've talked about the same theme with how it is, whether you want to be or not, this is what's going to be going on, how it ought to be. And then Vapor Trail, I can't remember, Alex, was it you or Rob, who said, look at these 4 songs and how well they fit together. Alex, I thought it was you.
I know for myself that when we get into track 7, basically when you get to Vapor Trail, to me that was like a certain arc for me that hit me the most. Vapor Trail, Earthshine, Sweet Miracle, just that like 2/3 of the way through the album where it's just like, ooh, now we're really cooking.
And to Vivian's point, and using that to tie it in, when we stop moving, when we become stagnant, that's when things get painful and we have to grow. So
the world's going to keep on moving. You got to move with it. And
Yep.
and another realization that he had to come to get here.
Yep.
Excellent points. Yes. And having said that, any other thoughts before we move to the next chorus? Any other?
I will say that, and it's not in no way, shape, or form is it a slam on Neil, but I would say that some of his, and this is what I was getting at in the chorus too, there are certain turns of phrase that he's using in this that are, I'm going to purposely say, not uncommon. So he was being, I assume, because obviously he was a very thought out person, I assume he was being intentionally down to earth and accessible for the
relatable,
song.
I was thinking accessibly.
In the idea of the writer's puns, and obviously not clever smirking writer's puns, but the whole idea of out of the cradle and hand rocking and but even getting into we didn't really hit on a balance on the edge of a knife. I mean, I was in a band where the guy who was the singer, he came up with those lyrics, and I guarantee he wasn't familiar with this album. So there are certain phrases that are just like the writer's phrase, the songwriter's phrase. But as I say, that's where I do believe that he was being honest, heartfelt, direct, genuine, and as they say, accessible at this point, because some of these phrases, it's just like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, of course. Anyway,
and there is a quote, which I don't have handy, of course, but it was a Neil quote that said something about taking the subjective and making it universal, and then taking the universal and making it subjective. So, as a writer, he succeeded. So, while these are all,
what happens when you dance on the edge of life? You're taking your chances. You're not going to fall. If you do, you're going to get back up. It's balancing on the edge of a knife. Also, could go either way. You're taking your chances, but you got to go through it again to see where you land.
Yeah. It's that fool on the precipice, It's that whole thing of it kind of brings back the idea of chance too from, Roll the Bones. So
I was thinking of that, yeah.
Chances, you're not going to know until you try what's going to happen. So the fact that he was emerging from this cradle, so to speak, all the points that Viv just mentioned too, you had to go through these things to get to that. Okay, I got to figure it out now. I know what to do. I can move forward now to the next.
Who danced on the edge of life more than he did? Nobody.
Yeah. Well, and to roll the bones, I was thinking the same thing and nodding. Think face up, goes for a chance, bravado. These are all about do something. Don't do nothing. Do something. Even if you fail, bravado, then you get right back up and you keep doing it again. At least you did something. So, again, coming out of that stagnant, these same themes keep coming up. So I don't think we're wrong.
Yeah, and hopefully you learn something in the process. That's the one thing too. You don't repeat the same, foolishness, so to speak. So I guess on that note, no pun intended, next chorus is the same as the first. Surge of energy, spark of inspiration. The breath of love is electricity. Maybe time is a bird in flight. Endlessly mocking. Here we come out of the cradle. I think this is a little bit of a difference. Endlessly rocking, endlessly rocking. So slight change. What shall we say?
Went back to the poem again, which I'm a fan of. So I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this, when Neil uses these, going back to Alex's observation on the verse, the alliteration that he uses and these phrases that we could all relate to, when we go back to the chorus, it's that uplifting. There's a word I'm looking for and I'm not finding, but uplifting is close enough, I guess. But it carries you. It's like, look here, let me spell it out for you. Here's the verse. And then the chorus, like a transcendence, I guess, might be what I'm looking for, is here's what it feels like to now move on. I think it does a great job of describing it here while using the poem as inspiration. And of course, the Neil playing with words, endlessly rocking, and they're in rock band. So that's before, when I first heard the song, I had no clue where the inspirations came from. All I kept hearing in my head was endlessly rocking repeatedly. And I'm like, okay, this is a good way to end an album. And it's like, okay, especially after all this heavy stuff, now that we've talked about it and talked through it, it's like, yeah, sort of like How It Is in Vapor Trail, or How It Is was a bit of a break before we got the first four, and then the fifth song's like, ooh, okay, I need a little bit of levity. And then into the deep stuff again, and now they're going to carry us out.
Yeah, that lift is something that's really very noticeable in every aspect. There's this much more things happening with the music. There's layering going on. Keddy's in a different register. He's rising up. So they're all rising to the occasion. And which brings us to the bridge, actually. So we got a 15 measure bridge with a guitar solo, which is, I think, something that was a complaint on the last episode, is the lack of a guitar solo, which, for Alex, he was more into the counterpoint of parts that he could actually put in. So this song, actually, we're at the end now. There's a guitar solo embedded in there, which I think even the remix kind of brings it out a bit more. So I think
it's an easy one to miss if you're not paying attention.
Yes.
I've got to jump on here. We do have a regular in our live chats on these roundtables named Rob. Hi, Rob, who complained that this song does not have a solo.
Well, this song
does.
So yeah, as Rob said, it's the bridge has the do no das, and that's 15 measures worth. So it's like 7 measures. Yes, 7 measures repeated. Then they throw in a 2/4. That's the 15th measure, or just a 2/4 measure. Life's in solo. It sneaks in for the second half. Basically, he's kind of going back to the chord solos that we really started to see on Signals, Grace Under Pressure. For Signals and Grace Under Pressure, it was a lot more overt, and certainly for a lot of 80s songs in general, you had certain chord parts and dyads and double stops that would be the solo, whether it's subdivisions and certain other in non-Rush songs. I mean, I think that one Laura Branigan song. So it's the sort of thing where, in this case, he just, as I say, he kind of sneaks it in. Where if I were to check my notes, he's got essentially like a fast vibrato going, and he just kind of plays some punctuated, as I say, double stops, some triads. They fit into a rhythm, basically. They fit into the rhythm parts, and as Rob said, guitar and bass both on this album are all about, let's layer the living hell out of the parts. How many parts? It's basically like they're hanging out with a looping pedal and saying, "Can I get 5 parts on this track?" Yes, I can. And that thus causing everyone to mix it, to say, All right, which one? And then you wind up with this before you get 2013. So.
And before I forget, I'm glad you brought up the layering of all the instruments because Getty actually had a quote I was supposed to read much earlier on. This began as a simple rock tune. A number of bass lines come in off the top to set the mood, with chords playing off each other in a dynamic way. If I were a piano player, those would have been piano parts. But since I'm a bassist and we were trying to use as little keyboard as possible, I had the bass perform that role. And then we've heard the vocal layerings, we've heard the guitar layerings,
right,
etc.
Well, Alex did mention that he didn't want to do a guitar solo during this album because he didn't want it to be about him. He wanted to be about the three of them getting together again. So that little those little inserts that he does it's to appease himself, to appease everybody, expects it of him, but he didn't want to make it that is an Alex solo. He couldn't do that.
Exactly.
He kept his role. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Mike, like Paul said, I mean, the first album without keyboards since Grace Under Pressure. And so it is the case of, well, what do we use in lieu of keyboards? Vocal overdubs and guitar overdubs. And hey, while we're at it, let's have some bass overdubs and see what we can do. So it, in many ways, kind of, I don't want to call it an experimental album, but certainly a departure album.
An evolution.
Yes, it relates back to who they were and who they became for their final, couple decades of their existence.
Yeah, not too shabby for a bunch of guys that didn't think they could still write as a band at this stage of the game, So quite a feat in itself. And just the fact that, Alex is so more, that's not really good English. He's more restrained in a way because he just came off of Victor. So all those experiences from doing all that, I mentioned it before, really kind of gave a maturation of like, well, if I'm gonna do a guitar solo, it's got to make sense to be in there. It can't just be just thrown in. Like I think Viv pointed to that aspect of it where it's got to make sense. I can't just put it in there because, hey, look at me, I can deedly all over the place. It doesn't fit the vibe of the song. It's got to be something that completes the tune. And the fact that he waited to the end is pretty restrained, and also appropriate. It's always appropriate what he does.
Definitely appropriate, yes.
Mm-hmm. Always.
Yeah. Nice. Very cool. And any other points before we move to the last bit?
Nope.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So last chorus, surge of energy, spark of inspiration, the breath of love is electricity, maybe time is a bird in flight, endlessly mocking. Here we come out of the cradle, endlessly rocking, endlessly rocking. So a bit of a repeat of the second chorus here. And there's a lot more going on in this last chorus. Really kind of takes us out really triumphantly. The lift just continues and just goes and goes.
Yes, good way to say the lift, because I mean, and that's kind of like, if they're saying we want a rock song to end the album, the way they did the outro, the way certainly Lifeson's overdubs at this point, if we are saying, hey, I'd like to have a solo on this, it's like, well, he gave you one, you just have to listen closely. But then he does throw in, there are certain leads, and as he said on like the Tiki website, like 22 years ago, he talked about how a lot of his solos were single string, which at the time I just thought, yeah. And this is one where he does have a lead that just climbs up that third string, or the G. It has a little bit of an ending riff. So the guitar does get a little more animated, single note wise in here. Not unlike, as I tie it back to the idea of a rock song, you think of how many AC/DC songs where they have a long outro chorus and Angus is just going buck wild while, the band just, vamps on the figure. And not just AC/DC, but a lot of, real rock bands type of thing.
Yeah. Good point. Yes. Very, very appropriate. And we have the outro, which has even more layers, endless you're rocking, just repeating. What can we say about the outro? I mean, it's definitely a nice climax to the tune.
The words you three have already used, I think, are perfect for this. Uplifting, continuing on, transcending. That's how I describe it. I mean, those are the best adjectives I've heard for this.
The very, very end. So many people wanna have decided that they don't like fade out songs. It's the sort of thing where this does not fade out. This ends with certain notes that are notes and chords and the overdubs that are sustained. In one case, he goes for a tremolo picked bit of ending, and then a quick kind of Pete Townsend ending. So this has that big rock ending too. No fade outs, no clamp down like the guillotine, but a certain degree of like parts that step off and parts that are just punch right in the end. On to the next album.
Yes, will there be a sequel? Yes, there is a sequel. And the fact that the song ends the way it does, it brings into Viv's point from earlier that this could have been a perfect concert closer, for sure. So, yeah, not too shabby. I guess on that note, we could probably call it on this one. Any final thoughts from anybody?
No, it's a perfect song. That's all. End of story.
Okay, there we go.
Since this is our last Vapor Trails song and last Vapor Trails Roundtable, think of the journey we've been on. One Little Victory, Ceiling Unlimited, Ghost Rider, Peaceable Kingdom, The Stars Look Down, How It Is, Vapor Trails, Secret Touch, Earthshine, Sweet Miracle, Nocturne, Freeze, and then Out of the Cradle.
Circle.
Yeah.
That's a lot for a person to go through, for people to experience, whoever's had these, not just to deify one writer. So just think of the life cycle that a person goes through when they go through something either traumatic or revelatory or whatever, and we just happen to have an album that covers it.
And Neil spells it out so we can go through it with somebody that's done it, that has experience, and that shows us another way to get out of it. He shows us, he explains to us, yeah, it's going to happen, but look.
There is a way out.
Why he's the perfect lyricist, because his words, no matter what you're going through, there's going to be a song, an experience, an emotion that it's going to tie right to Neil.
Mm-hmm.
And drawn from hundreds of inspirations and writings and pieces of art and weather patterns and philosophers and whoever over thousands and thousands of years.
Yes. That we would never, ever have delved into on our own. And he put it in layman's terms, kind of, for us.
And then think about Getting Alex having to write music that we can all relate to and gravitate towards and love and sing along with to that. So, no small feat.
That's not perfect. There is no such thing.
Yeah, no small feat. That's my last.
Beautiful. A power with 100 names, right? So
nice.
There you go. Very cool. Well, I guess on that note, we can conclude this episode. We really appreciate you guys sticking around for this far into the video. And if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Join us so you can see what's coming up next. Please visit all the links below. Give us a tip on Ko-fi if you really enjoyed the content. And we bid you adieu. Thank you very much for viewing us. Thank you.
See you in a couple weeks.
Good night, everybody.